In this next segment, we're going to talk about the type of tests an ethical hacker can run on a system. And the reason we want to bring this up is there are different kinds of testing depending upon what your goal is or the organization's goal, what you want to test, and also the level of knowledge an ethical hacker or penetration tester has on the system. So you'll hear these terms tossed around a lot in CEH classes, maybe even on the exam, in security literature, documents, and so forth, and just in the community. So it's a good idea to know what these things are and what they mean. We have vulnerability testing, full penetration testing, targeted testing, black box testing, gray box testing, and white box testing. Let's go ahead and take a look at what some of these are. Now, during vulnerability testing, really all you're doing is running a scan of the system and maybe some vulnerability scanning tools to determine what vulnerabilities are actually on the system. Most of the time we see these vulnerability tests run on systems that have to have a vulnerability scan done on them for compliance purposes or for a security report, for example. When you're testing for vulnerabilities only, you're just getting the raw list of vulnerabilities, what patches they need, what security configuration issues they may have, and so forth. You typically do not exploit anything. All you're doing then is reporting what you're finding. That's all a vulnerability test really is. Now, a penetration testing team may take that report and use it as input for a penetration test later. But this is typically something that's given to management or technicians so they can fix things. No exploitation at all. Then you have at the other end of the spectrum a full penetration test. And this basically is full-on testing for all targets that you have access to over all possible attack vectors. You may try web application attacks, SQL injection. You may try to invade a wireless network, come through the firewall, compromise network security devices, run exploits on operating systems and code. Those are the types of things you might encounter during a full penetration test. Now, obviously, a vulnerability test is at one end of the spectrum and a full penetration test is at the other. So is there a happy middle? Well, yes, there is. That's called targeted testing. And targeted testing only targets specific pieces of the infrastructure. And this is usually by convention or by agreement between the penetration tester and the organization being tested. For example, they may want only a network scan and for the hackers, the ethical hackers, to try to get through the network perimeter, like the firewall or something. Or maybe it's a physical security test and you're trying to break through the physical security barriers of the organization. Maybe it's against just a database or against a particular server. Maybe it's against a small section of the organization, like the finance department. In any case, targeted testing doesn't do a full-on test on everything. It targets specific systems, pieces of the organization, parts of the infrastructure. Now, those were the kind of tests based upon scale, really, whether it's a small scale or a large scale or a targeted scale. The other way we can categorize different types of tests is through the level of knowledge about a system. And typically we see three things: black box testing, gray box testing, and white box testing. And what black box testing basically means is that we have zero knowledge, no prior knowledge of the target or the system. We haven't been told anything. Maybe we're told, hey, you're going to do a pen test on ABC Company, and it starts this day, and that's it. And then you would actually have to do your reconnaissance and everything and find out information about the organization. You'd have to do your footprinting and so forth. During gray box testing, on the other hand, you have a limited amount of knowledge or some knowledge about the target or the system. Maybe you know the organization. Maybe you've met with the security and network administrators and they've given you the IP address range and that's it and nothing else. Maybe they've told you you're going to encounter 2 database servers and we run an Active Directory network, something like that. But you won't have a lot of knowledge. It may be just enough to get you started. And in a gray box test, maybe you're on the internal side of the organization and you're starting from inside their environment with very little knowledge. A black box test is usually on the outside of an organization. You're trying to get through the firewall, through the network perimeter, for example. Now, white box testing at the other end of the knowledge spectrum is where you have full-on system knowledge about the entire system, the organization, its architecture, and so forth. And the goal of this is that you'll typically know what you're going to find. You're just testing to see if you can still exploit it. Maybe someone's run a vulnerability scan on the system and you have the vulnerabilities that you think could be exploited. So you take this list and you start with it, and in a white box test, you would try to exploit each and every one of these vulnerabilities, already knowing what you might find, what vulnerabilities are out there. You would already know the network architecture. You'd already have access to the firewall rules. You may even know the administrator passwords and user accounts, but you're still testing to see if the security perimeter and security controls can be broken. Now let's talk about targeted testing for a moment. When we looked at targeted testing a moment ago, I told you that this was only testing for specific things that you and the organization agree on. Now let's go in a little bit more depth on this. This could mean databases, web application testing. You might even do a code review on some applications, like a secure code review. There might be physical security tests and those other types of tests that we typically associate with penetration testing. But there also could be things like defensive testing only, where the penetration team hits everything and it's a test to see how well the defenders defend the network. Or it could be an incident response type of test where you determine how well the organization responds to incidences. In any case, these are the different types of targeted tests you could run on an organization.